Hi, I'm Menaka Raman-Wilms, and you're listening to the Decibel from the Globe and Mail. The war in Ukraine rages on. Western countries have provided support, like money, gear, and sometimes weapons, but have stopped short of getting their militaries involved. That's the case with Canada, as well as the UK, and during his State of the Union address earlier this week, U.S. President Joe Biden made his position clear.
Our forces are not engaged and will not engage in the conflict with Russian forces in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies in the event that Putin decides to keep moving west. For that purpose, we have mobilized American ground forces, air squadrons, ship deployments to protect NATO countries including Poland, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And as I've made crystal
Meanwhile, Russian forces are making advances across Ukraine. Today, the Globe's senior international correspondent, Mark Mackinnon, joins us from Lviv, Ukraine. This is the Decibel. Mark, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Menaka.
So we're speaking on Wednesday here. How would you describe the state of things in Ukraine right now?
Well, it's a big question. Ukraine is losing ground. They've had the southern city of Kherson, which is near to Crimea, appears to be fully in the control of Russian forces. That's in the south. Also, the port city of Berdyansk has fallen to Russia. The port city of Mariupol is surrounded by Russian forces, though it seems like Ukrainian troops are still in control of that city. Chernihiv in the north is surrounded, and we see just utter scenes of destruction in the big cities of Kharkiv and Kiev as Russia, unable to break through the Ukrainian perimeters, has taken in recent days to just shelling the center of these cities, hitting targets that are civilian targets or near civilian targets. What's been really incredible, though, at the same time as Ukraine's been losing this ground and they've been hit with all this rocket fire and artillery fire, the spirit of Ukrainians is absolutely unbroken. You go into the cities and people are singing the national anthem in the subways that are doubling as bomb shelters these days. But also just in an incredible scene today in a town called Konotop, which is in Sumy province in eastern Ukraine, where they're fully surrounded, and the Russian army gave an ultimatum to the town's mayor, and he decided he had to take it to the people. And so there's this remarkable video online of the mayor sort of standing in a public square and saying, my friends, we have to, we've got the decision before us. We can sort of surrender this city to the Russians, and they say they'll spare it, or we can stand our ground. We can fight. And the whole crowd there, everybody who gathered on the square just shouts back, "Of course we fight, we fight." And I think that really captures what's going on here, because I think Ukrainians know that at least without NATO air support, which doesn't seem to be coming, they're outgunned, especially in terms of they can't compete with the Russian Air Force. As brave as their soldiers have been on the ground, they can't compete with Russia's long-range missiles and artillery.
So you're saying here, Mark, it sounds like there's a bit of a shift now with Russia actually targeting more populated areas. Like you're saying, within cities, there's more direct targeting there. What does this shift say about the direction the war is taking? And I guess what's Russia's thinking in actually targeting these areas now?
Honestly, it's a surprising one, because Vladimir Putin's logic, as someone who lived in Russia and been reporting on Vladimir Putin for 20 years ago, I thought he believed that these Russian-speaking cities like Kharkiv and Kiev would welcome him, and that the Ukrainian military would collapse quickly. Even the U.S. was broadcasting this. Kyiv could be sacked in 72 hours. This sort of messaging was that the Ukrainians didn't have much of a chance, and not only is the Ukrainian military putting up an impressive fight, but ordinary Ukrainians have made it quite clear at this point they don't want to be liberated from anything by Russia, that they're going to fight Russia. And so it feels a bit out of frustration that the Russian military is starting to just fire rockets into the center of cities full of Russian speakers and full of Russian Orthodox cathedrals in some cases. It's really just, a lot of this war feels impossible, but this in particular just feels incomprehensible. Like it doesn't make any sense. And I've been messaging with people I knew in Moscow who are analysts who have in the past advised the Kremlin, and they're saying they have no idea what's going on. It doesn't make sense to them either. Okay. And I think what it means is that that Mr. Putin and his generals are frustrated, and I think they're also trying to cow the Ukrainian people into surrender, to making it make the costs so high and so terrible, as we've seen in other Russian wars. You think of Syria and you think of Chechnya, and the way that cities were utterly destroyed in both of those places. To make it impossible for Volodymyr Zelensky's government to continue this war, to force them to seek a surrender to avoid an escalating civilian toll.
You've talked about the Ukrainian resistance a lot here too, Mark, and it looks like now the Russian army is now working up to big campaigns in Kyiv and Kharkiv. I wonder, at this point, from everything that you've seen there and the people you've talked to, will Ukraine be able to hold off the Russian army?
There's two answers to that. And one is no, I don't think they are capable of defeating the Russian military, not because their troops aren't experienced enough, aren't brave enough. But when you're being hit from the air constantly by Iskander missiles, by bombs dropped from the sky, it's difficult to compete with that. And the second side of that story is I don't see any way that Russia can hope to occupy these places. If there's a Kalashnikov out of every window, there's a Molotov cocktail being thrown from every passing car. I saw, yesterday there was a video of a guy just driving along. He pulls up beside a Russian tank that's completely sort of, not expecting an attack from the sedan beside it. And the guy just rolled down his passenger window and launched a Molotov cocktail into the tank, which lit it up, So that's the kind of resistance we're seeing, that, you can't, as the United States learned in Iraq, you can win the war and then lose the peace or lose what comes afterwards. And I think that's a very comparable situation. I was in Baghdad when it fell in 2003, and this initially impressive American military campaign, hours later, just driving around the city, someone shot at my car, and I realized these people don't want us here. And it's going to be really hard to stay in a country where you're completely unwelcome.
Is there any situation you think where other countries, NATO countries, Canada, the US, Europe, would actually get involved in physical fighting in this war?
It's a really difficult one. And I think it was Seva Gunitsky, who's a very bright professor at the University of Toronto, put on Twitter today. But he said, essentially, there are two choices here. You can be in favor of NATO trying to establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine, as it did over Iraq, to stop Saddam Hussein from targeting the Kurds, as it did over the Balkans. But that could bring us to the brink of a nuclear conflict, as Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made very clear today, and as Mr. Putin has made clear by putting his nuclear forces on alert. And I don't know if the West is ready for an extinction event over Ukraine. The other side of this is, are we willing to sit back and watch, humanitarian catastrophe, war crimes being committed in Europe in 2022? And you're kind of on one side of that or the other right now, which is there's no right or wrong answer. And I think NATO and the West are starting to understand the stakes here, and they're going to incredible lengths with targeting Russia's economy. Now I think for the first time, the Russians I know are waking up. The value of their savings is obliterated. They can't fly anywhere. There's no sporting events. Concerts are being canceled that people were looking forward to going to. The price of everything is going through the roof. So I think if there's a strategy here, and it's only a nascent one, and it's a long shot, frankly, it's to force the Russian people to take to the streets, to realize that they can't live like this either. And that's the only peaceful way out I can see, as peaceful as that would be. There's no peace here, obviously.
You talk about the idea of a peaceful way out. We have seen some attempts at peace talks. Is there any kind of progress or any hope that might come to a solution?
No, because what Mr. Putin wants is Ukrainian capitulation. That's why you see this targeting of civilian areas. So it's not a peace talk. It's a surrender. It's the beginning of the arm twist. They're saying to Mr. Zelensky, is this enough? Is this enough? Is this enough? And so far, Volodymyr Zelensky, who many people underestimated coming into this conflict, there was a lot of grumbling in Kyiv, even the day before this war began, that he was the wrong guy for this moment. And he's impressed everybody with his resilience, his strength, his charisma, his courage. And he does represent Ukrainians, all of them right now, when he says, no, thank you. He says, it's not no, thank you. There's billboards here in Lviv that I can't repeat what they say, but the very strong message, the same one that was conveyed by the 13 Ukrainian soldiers on Snake Island to Mr. Putin. And so, yes, these talks will continue because, as Zelensky himself said, you can't, in this moment, say you don't want to have peace talks.
To reach an agreement. We are for dialogue, yes, but the least that must happen is the bombardment of people must stop. You simply have to stop the bombardment and then sit down behind the table for talks.
But they're not about peace. They're about Russia repeating its terms of surrender. Like, this is what we will stop if, and that's the demilitarization of Ukraine and a change of government in Ukraine. There's a lot of rumors coming out now, reports that Russia's intent is to restore Viktor Yanukovych, the pre-2014 president, who they see as always having been the constitutional president of Ukraine, despite being absolutely hated here and thrown out by the street protests 8 years ago. Their intent may be to restore his rule, however much violence it requires.
If I can take you back to February 24th, when the invasion did begin, when you were in Kyiv, can you just explain to us, what was that like and where were you when things started then?
Cancer patients talk about the last good day, the last day before they started to really feel like their life was heading towards an ending. I remember if Kyiv had a last good day, it was the night of the 23rd. And there was a sense, because, it was all over the news that there were reports the Russians were going to attack at 4 a.m. or what have you that day. So I went to my favorite restaurant in Kyiv and I ordered my favorite food. And I went and dined by myself. There were a lot of colleagues having tables sort of around the city. I just wanted to sit by myself for a bit. And then, stayed up till 3 a.m. because that was when the battle was supposed to start or something. And then nothing happened. So I said, I'm going to go to bed. And I think I closed my eyes at 4. And at 4:40, the first air raid sirens were screaming. So went down into the parking garage, 2 floors under the Radisson Hotel in central Kyiv. So when the war began, I was in a parking garage, thinking of all the things that you forgot to bring down the stairs with you.
Like what? Like what kind of things do you think about in that moment?
You sort of, the first things you grab are, I'm a journalist, so I grabbed my backpack with all my work gear in it, and I had my bulletproof vest, and I had my computer, and I had my phone, and I had all my cords and all that sort of thing. And I got down there, and you realize you don't know how long you're going to be down there for. And all I want to do is take out my contact lenses, and that was all sort of 9 floors up. And my asthma inhaler was not where it should be. Stuff like that. And a flashlight. I'd forgotten a flashlight. And so the go bag wasn't primed. It now very much is, obviously.
And you stayed in Kyiv for a few days, and then eventually you left that hotel. What made you leave that part of the city?
I sort of realized we were within a few hundred meters of potential targets. And also, to be honest, being in a crowd of journalists with different levels of panic, it's not good for anybody's mental health. So we decided, first of all, just myself and my colleague, Emma, from the Guardian newspaper, and our photographer and sort of local journalist, Anton Skiba, who's an amazing resource. The 3 of us just decided to move to Anton's flat on the outskirts of Kyiv, and we stayed there for a night. And then the next morning we woke up, and it was just the sounds of war were quite intense, and we decided that rather than being inside what everyone believed would be the siege of Kyiv, we would just move just outside the city. So we moved to this safe house, as we called it. It's more of a country cottage. It had like a trampoline and a wood-burning stove and a little fire pit outside. Nice place to go camping. And for about 12 hours, that was a really good idea. And then, we started to hear warplanes screaming overhead and artillery fire, not coming towards us, but outgoing, meaning there were some Ukrainian artillery positions nearby. Not having tactical maps of Ukraine at hand, we'd put ourselves between 2 more targets that we hadn't calculated on. One was a Ukrainian airbase, and the other was an oil refinery. Neither was particularly close, but after the oil refinery got bombed, which sent us all diving to the ground for must have been one of a dozen times over the weekend. We just thought this is not sustainable. The air is sort of acrid, and we don't know how this fight for the airbase is going to go. And if these Ukrainian artillery positions keep moving closer to us, we might be the recipient, get close to some return fire. So after a few days there, we decided to move again, and we got in our. We didn't have a car, which is a big part of the drama. We were stuck there. We wanted to leave, but we didn't have a car.
So what did you do? How did you get a car then? How did you get out?
This sounds crazy. It probably was. We found a car online that was for sale in Lviv, actually. And so online we purchased ourselves I think it's a 2004 Land Rover that somehow has British license plates on it. So now we're the proud owners of a 2004 Land Rover. Well, the Globe and Mail and the Guardian are.
And so you've got this car now, and I guess I know you take it and you're driving then towards Lviv. You wrote a piece where you mentioned checkpoints along the way. Can you just tell us about those?
We charted this very wiggly route through the Ukrainian countryside to try and go between these 2 points that were now there's at least a Russian presence in, if not under Russian control. And I'd say every 10 kilometers or so, you run into another Ukrainian checkpoint. And some of these are incredibly professional, like they're run by soldiers in uniforms who just sort of look at your IDs and then wave you onwards. But others, they're just sort of the villagers have gotten themselves together and they've, erected some cinder blocks and, pulled some logs across the road. And they're just incredibly nervous, as you can imagine. They don't know why this license plate, this Land Rover with foreign license plates is coming at them or what's going on inside. We had some really interesting interrogations, including one that involved this guy, his name was Anton, saying, I'm sorry, I'm going to check you with you say you're from Canada, I'm going to check you out with my brother. And so he calls his brother in Etobicoke, who answers the phone at 4 a.m. I guess he was staring.
Ontario? His brother's in Etobicoke, Ontario.
In Etobicoke, Ontario, sorry, yeah. And he's awakened at 4 a.m, but he's watching the news, of course. And so he says, I said, my name is Mark Mackinnon. I work for the Globe and Mail. If you turn on, your computer right now and go to the Globe and Mail homepage, you'll see the work I do. And he's like, yeah, that's all well and good, but where are you from? And I said, Ottawa. He's like, where exactly in Ottawa? And I said, well, I grew up in Stittsville. Where my parents used to live is right where the Senators' rink is. I almost called it the Correll Center because that's what it was once called, or the Palladium, or it had all these different names. Finally, I remember it's called the Canadian Tire Center now, and I called it a rink. And he just said, hand it back to my brother. And I was like, oh my God, he knows it's an arena. It's not a rink. And now I've blown but I think just knowing where the Senators play was enough for him.
Mark, the last time we spoke to you last week, it was just before the Russian invasion actually began, when you were in Kiev, and you're now in Lviv. Can you just kind of contrast those two cities for us? How is Lviv different right now than Kiev is?
I'll preface it by saying that I began my day by, having a warm breakfast, which was impossible the last few days around Kyiv. But then I was in a bomb shelter before I finished my coffee because there were air raid sirens. So this is a place, Lviv in Western Ukraine has largely been unscarred so far. It's a long way from the cities that Mr. Putin is currently targeting. It's 500 kilometers west of Kyiv. Bank machines still kind of function here. It took me a while, but I found one and got some cash today. Restaurants function up to a certain point, though alcohol sales are banned as part of the general martial law that's been declared in the country. So, it's nothing like normal here. I was watching people putting sandbags at the window of the French consulate a while ago and sort of buildings in the main square were having metal sheeting, sort of hammered over their windows. It's still placed very much under the control of the Ukrainian military. But people wonder for how long. And given what Mr. Putin has done and is doing to Russian-speaking cities in the east of Ukraine, this is Western Ukraine. This is the part of the country that has always resisted Russian rule. It's the heartland of the sort of Ukrainian nationalism, of the Ukrainian Patriotic Army, which Mr. Putin calls a Nazi formation. If he gets here, I think people here are quite afraid he'll be even more merciless than he's being in the Russian-speaking parts of the country.
Do you think there'll be a time where you have to even leave Lviv and get out of the country altogether?
I hope that moment doesn't come. My intention is not to leave until it's absolutely necessary. We obviously are talking about these things with our editors, with my Ukrainian colleagues, for whom it's a much harder decision to stay or to go. If the war comes to Lviv, it'll be difficult. And I think everyone assumes it will come to Lviv eventually. It's as we discovered around Kyiv, it's very difficult to work when not only is there the Russian military taking action around you and this physical danger, but the people you're trying to interview, they're incredibly suspicious of strangers who are showing up right now. They don't really want to talk or give their names right now. So it's a scary time for everybody. We intend to stay. I intend to stay. I'm making this. Why I'm in Lviv is not because I want to be as far away as possible, but to get things like money and gasoline to continue. Yeah, certainly hope to remain, hope that this conflict somehow comes to an end, and then I want to be here to see what's happened to this country if we get a moment to drive forward back to Kyiv, to a city that I love so much.
Mark, thank you so much for taking the time today, and please do stay as safe as possible.
Thank you very much.
That's it for today. I'm Menaka Raman-Wilms. Our producers are Madeline White and Cheryl Sutherland. David Crosby edits the show. Kasia Mihailovich is our senior producer, and Angela Pacenza is our executive editor. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.